Welcome to episode 292 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. In a moment, I'll be joined by Quaid Combstock, and we're going to talk about ultrafast delivery, quick commerce. You know, your groceries delivered in 10 minutes. Or is it 15 minutes? Or 20? Or 30? How is that sector going? Well, Quaid's got a bit of an inside perspective on that. So, stay tuned for that. Before we get to the discussion with Quaid, a quick reminder about some of the events that are coming up in 2023. There's the Retail Supply Chain and Logistics Expo happening 28th of February, 1st of March in London. Go to thepostalhub.com/events for more information there, as well as another great event happening soon, which is the Leaders in Logistics Summit, 28th and 29th of March 2023 in London. I think as this is released, there's still a discount happening. If there's not, well, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. All right, go to thepostalhub.com/events for more details on these and other great events happening around the world in 2023. Right, let's get to Quaid Combstock now. Joining me on the line is Quaid Combstock. Quaid is a logistics and quick delivery expert. Quaid, welcome. Before we get stuck into our topic for today, can you share with listeners a little bit about what you've been up to in the world of quick commerce, Q-commerce, ultrafast delivery, whatever it's called at the moment?
Yeah, well, my industry does have a wonderful habit of renaming itself on a yearly basis. But Ian, thanks for having me on. So my time in the industry, I've spent about 6-7 years in what I'm going to call the delivery operations industry, the wider on-demand, the hyperlocal, and of course what is now known as the Q-commerce industry, the quick commerce industry, until we rename it next year.
We've seen a proliferation of startups in this sector promising, 10-minute delivery, 15-minute delivery. I guess the question on everybody's mind is, well, is it viable?
So I think there's two ways of answering this. First of all, you've got to look at it from an operational sense. Is it viable? And somewhat, yes. We know that because we've done it. You've seen before where we've had deliveries happening in minutes. I think the quickest Q-commerce delivery I've personally experienced was in about 8 minutes. So we can show from an operational sense it works. But when we look at it from a financial sense, I think we've all accepted by this point it does not work. And the easiest way to validate that comment is go look at which Q-commerce companies are doing deliveries in 15 minutes today. And the reality is, I don't think you'll find one. Getir was always very wise. They never actually added an SLA to their delivery window. So they never said 15, they never really said 20 or 30. They just said it would come when it came. And everyone across the industry, it kind of assumed it was 15 minutes. And often they hit that, but they never actually held themselves to it. Gorillas offered 10 minutes, then it went to 15, then 20, and I don't think they actually advertised anymore either before the acquisition. Most companies, including the likes of Zap, they were 10, then 15, then 20. So I think we can all, by this point, accept that the 15-minute SLA is long gone, and that's because no one offers it anymore.
I get the feeling also that there's infrastructure is being denied to some of these startups, whether it's cities outlawing or cracking down on dark stores and things like that. Is that part of it, or is it just the operational side of things?
Well, I don't think you're wrong at all, Ian. I think depending on what country you're in, it really depends on the impact. If you go to Central Europe, you look at the Netherlands, France, admittedly, those guys are having a much worse time than we are. But if you look at the likes of London, we're having no issues at all. But there's a big difference there on how planning permission is given out to companies. The UK has had rules since the 80s on this stuff, so we've been pretty good. But the Dutch and the French, they had no rules. So Q-commerce took advantage of the lack of legislation, and they just put themselves wherever they wanted. And understandably, they've frustrated a lot of the locals very, very quickly. But if you look at why the 15-minute window isn't working financially, I don't really think it's got to do with the locations, but rather it's the obviousness of, if it's a 15-minute delivery, you've got to get an item out of the door very, very quickly to a customer, and then you've got to get that rider back to the store to get the next delivery out. The problem with this is with 15 minutes, you don't have enough time to batch the orders together. So without batching the orders together, you can only take one. Now, if it takes me 15 minutes to get there and 15 minutes to get back, that's half an hour. Say under the London market now, that's about £12 an hour wages. So that's about £6 in delivery cost. But you're only charging about £3 to the consumer. So you're already making a loss there. The reality is 15-minute doesn't work because you can't take more than one order in most occasions. And if you want it to financially work, you need to take at least 2 or 3 orders. So it's not just so much about the location of where these dark stores are, more so the obviousness of you can't get the items out quick enough without them doing one rider per one order. And that is just nowhere near financially effective.
And we've also seen, I think it was GoPuff, maybe there might have been one other, who introduced their own range of retail products, the basics. And I mean, was part of the idea of that so that they could eat the margin on those products, or is that not really what's happening?
I think that's what they'll tell investors. I think on the simple answer here is that they go around telling everyone that they're launching their own range so that they can cut the cost down, they can have greater margins. And to an extent that is true. You're probably increasing your margin from 3% to 4%. But the reality here is if I start talking about that 1 percentile difference over a box of cereal, that is not going to cover the £3 deficit I just highlighted a moment ago. So the reality you've got here is you need to be looking at ways you can increase margins far, far more than an own brand. I've said for quite a while, I don't think the own brands have got anything to do with the margins within reason, but rather a lot more about PR. Having your name out there, the fact that it's an excuse for a PR release, the fact that it keeps the investors happy because you get to pretend that you're putting their money somewhere. But the amount of cost of setting it up, the main, actually having to buy the stuff and then get it into a dark store and sending it out to a customer, it works. You are going to make a bit more money, but you're not going to make that much more money. Probably not enough for the hassle that a lot of companies are at today. So it sounds a lot more dramatic than it actually is.
What do you think's the end game for some of these ultra-fast startups? We've seen a few flame out spectacularly. We've seen some acquisitions, like the acquisition of Gorillas just in the last few months. What's your take on this?
So I don't think there's one specific answer to the question. I think it's a lot more of a multitude of options. And I think it realistically comes down to how much funding was achieved originally. You've got a lot of companies that have secured a couple million, at best 10 million. And those are the type of companies that are failing and flaming out pretty quickly, simply because they don't have the capital to continue. But you do have some other companies that, while have not raised money recently in the last year, they're still around. I mean, you look at London-based Zap. They're still around. They've cut their losses in 2 international markets. They've retreated back to London, and they're still alive today. But they secured 100 million in their last funding round. And that's a considerable amount of money to keep you going for a while. The difficulty you're going to have with a company like the Zap is they've got enough money to survive today, but the market isn't going to allow them to get any more money in the future. The unit economics aren't going to be strong enough to raise another round. And considering the current economic market conditions, no VC is going to give them more money, both because of how the economy is doing, but also because you'd rather invest in a bigger player that's going to win, more like Getir or GoPuff. So I think you are going to see a lot of companies flame out. For a long time, I thought there'd be a lot of companies that would get acquired just for the sake of a bit of a PR, secure the market, stop the volume going to other players. But what I saw in the European market particularly was that companies are quite willing to let other companies die and just not buy them out, simply because it's cheaper. The amount of money that you'd need to buy this company for isn't worth what you're going to get in return. But if you let them die, you're going to naturally probably absolve their customers anyway. So it's not that much of a risk. Even if you don't get all of them, the amount of money you'd have to pay for some of them, to try and achieve some of those customers, it's just not worth it. Most customers will leave to another platform once the company dies down anyway. But if you look at Gorillas, which is obviously the big recent acquisition, I think it was expected that Gorillas would get acquired. I mean, frankly, it'd be stupid not to. Any Q-commerce player in the market would want to acquire them because, irrespective of their financials, they do have a huge infrastructure across the European market, and they are a huge force to go up against. And of course, adding that to anyone's arsenal is going to be a pretty impressive feat to do. But the difficulty you're going to get, and I think most importantly here, is they got a lot more money than I thought they would. They achieved over $1 billion. And frankly, when I was estimating what they'd go for, I was expecting somewhere more in the region of 200 million to 500 million, not over $1 billion. So I think Getir still ended up paying over the odds for them. But I think the risk of losing them to someone else is probably way too high. But if we look at where the future is, I think you're going to see a lot more markets, a lot more companies die down just because they're not going to get the funding to continue. But I also think you're going to get a lot more funding in 2 companies particularly. I think Getir and GoPuff will continue to get funding. I think there will be a down round though. I don't think they're going to get them at such a high valuation because I don't think the market is competitive enough for them to command an incredibly high valuation. But either way, if you look at where they were 2 years ago, both parties have done incredibly well over the last 2 years. So I think either way, the quid's in. But if we look at the likes of other big name players, Flink out in Germany is going to be an interesting one. They've recently just cut their losses in Austria, one of their 4 global markets, and they've withdrawn from that after going into administration. They've acquired also another company in France, but that's proving to do so well, quite well so far. And of course, they've got their Dutch market, which is doing well. Flink think that the German market is going to be profitable by the end of this calendar year, so end of 2023. Will be very interesting to see if that holds true. And I think a company like that can have the potential to be acquired. I'm quite intrigued to see if GoPuff will use this as an opportunity to acquire them to get into the Central European market. But I could also see GoPuff just avoiding any acquisitions for now, considering they want to IPO in the very near future. But I don't think there's a clear answer. I don't think there's a clear answer to whether people are going to die, get acquired, simply because I think it comes down to there are only a couple of companies worth acquisition. And whether the other companies will just, the smaller companies will just keep going, very, very limited volume, very limited money, but they'll survive for a while. I think they could survive the end of the year.
We were seeing loads of venture capital funding pouring into this. Ultrafast delivery, quick commerce was going to be the future, it was the next big thing. And now it seems to have come up against, I don't know, the cold reality of logistics. And the venture capital funding seems to have dried up. What are you seeing?
So I think you've got to take a historical look at this. The Q-commerce market, and there's no easy way to put this, but the VCs were idiots at the amount of money they invested. I think, if you look at this from a historical point of view, in 2020, COVID hits, we're all working from home. We've got these grand ideas of what the problems face today and how can we fix them. And Q-commerce is certainly a thought to that. Irrespective of the time turnaround, so if you got to look at it and the fact that none of us could get easy access to our groceries and we wanted deliveries, it's a perfect proposition. And of course, the market is increasingly always going to be faster. People are always going to want to look at ways that they can improve the customer experience, and getting goods to a consumer quicker is always going to be better. The problem you're going to have there is VCs weren't operating under normal conditions. They didn't have an office. They couldn't fly out to meet the clients. They couldn't do the due diligence that they normally would because the world was going in a weird way. It wasn't working right. So VCs went, I know you. You sound like a good chap. Here's quite a few million. Go away and spend. And then, of course, this industry then turned into one player doing that, and it all went quite well. And then before you know it, you have multiple Q-commerce providers across each city globally, all major cities globally, and they're all giving out loads and loads of money. And it was all stupid. There's no finer point to put on it. They didn't deserve the money they were handing out. But the problem with VCs, I often find, is that they like to go where the crowd is. Once they found this idea that once one VC is involved, they want to be involved too. There's a huge desire to not to be left behind, and that to me is exactly what Q-commerce was. VCs didn't want to be left behind, and before long, you've got an investment, and they need more money to grow. So you give them a bit more money, and then before you know it, the big VCs, SoftBank, come along and go, okay, well, we're going to get involved too. Everyone's making a load of money here, and more money's put into it. The problem I've got is there's no question of profitability yet. I'm not even convinced from the investors I've spoken to that profitability was ever sold. And I think one of the bigger problems with that is when you look at the numbers of Q-commerce, many people will say they don't work, and I don't agree with that. If you look at the numbers of Q-commerce, they do work. The number of orders you need to do per hour to make it financially viable, that you can make it work. The problem you've got with that is when you've got in the likes of London, and at one point there are 6, 7, 8 different Q-commerce players, the proposition works on this concept of utilization and having enough orders in the same place. That's when the numbers work. That's what's being sold to the VCs. The problem you've got is when you've got one company who are doing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 orders an hour, it works really well. But when you have 5, 6, 7, 8 companies doing it, it results in them having one order per rider per hour, which does not financially work. I remember once in London, I saw 5 people on my street alone ordering from a Q-commerce company. And that to me is proof that the Q-commerce concept is going to work. And that's what VCs are buying into. The problem is it was all from 5 different companies. It wasn't a matter of one company doing 5 orders at an extremely profitable rate. It was 5 different companies doing one order at a very unprofitable rate. And that's where the VCs fell down. They didn't go through the logic that if one company gets the funding and does well at this, multiple people will come out and they'll try to do the exact same thing. And that's where it all went down. And if we look at, we fast forward a bit a year later, now into 2022, the investment world, they've realized that things aren't going right. So early 2022, people are still throwing money at these problems. They're still going to work out wonderfully well and everyone wants to be involved. But then the Ukraine invasion happens and everything changes. Oil prices go down or go up. the cost of goods goes increasingly up. The world starts hitting this cost of living crisis. And of course, money's being withheld from lots of different potential companies. And that's when a lot of issues for VC started, because they realize actually that what they've invested in is an over-glorified bubble. They're not investing into just simply a company that's going to, with a product that's going to work, but rather they've invested into a concept that the fundamental foundations are fractured completely. And that was a huge problem. Then they very quickly went, well, we can't give you any more money until we analyze what the problem here is and what can we do to resolve it. And they went away, and I've spoken to a lot of investors during this time. And the common answer that came back from them was quite simply is, we don't know. It's not to say that they knew it to be bad, and it wasn't that they knew it to be good. The reality is they did not know really what was going to happen. And that is quite concerning, because as a VC, especially when you're doing hundreds of millions of investment, you'd like to think they've done the basic due diligence to actually go, well, we know what we're investing in. And the reality is, I think a lot of people they were investing in a wave of a euphorian wave of this concept of Q-commerce rather than the actual product itself. And that is never how to do investments. And then, of course, you go throughout the year and the economy gets worse. Ukraine invasion was clearly not a short-lived thing. And again, people are still pondering. But the good news is, I do think that 2023 will be a bit different. That's not to say that every Tom, Dick and Harry is going to get investment, because that bubble has burst, that bubble is gone. But rather, I think you're going to start seeing a few more investments in now the big names. I think there is what we'd call a path to profitability. There is what a lot of people are seeing as potential for this market to be profitable. But I think you're going to see, rather than everyone investing in multiple companies with hope that one company wins, you're going to see investments in two companies, probably GoPuff and Getir. Everyone else probably won't get an investment, but rather will be looking very closely at whether people die or they're acquired. I think there are two big companies that are to watch, which is Zap and Flink. They're the type of companies that are doing relatively well on their own, but they need investment to really take on the likes of Getir and GoPuff. They're nowhere near as big. And it's a question, if they can secure investment, then I think we'll see a relaxation across the market. If they can't achieve investment, then I think you'll see the problem that this industry won't get investment for quite a while. But I know that you're going to have a lot of naysayers listening to this, Ian. I think that you've got the answer here is that people moaned about on-demand logistics 10 years ago. They moaned about it 8 years ago. Now, as we keep going on, that people keep going to keep moaning about it, but people keep investing and consumers keep wanting it more. And it's something that as a society, we're going to keep desiring more and more as we get on. It used to be back in the day, you'd take a week for a delivery, then it became 2 days, then 1 day, then same day. The market is changing, and these companies, whether you like it or not, they're helping change it. They are creating a mental shift among consumers. People know they can get items quickly now. And I think that VCs will continue to buy into that proposition.
Well, let's just change the way we're looking at this then. If you're a postal operator, a parcel carrier, you're delivering next day, same week, whatever it might be, what are some of the learnings that you might be able to get out of all of this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the one most fundamental thing that people need to realize here is it's no longer about next day delivery. It's no longer about same day delivery, and it's no longer about on-demand delivery, but rather that e-commerce providers should really be looking at offering all three. It's no longer a matter of having to work out what's the most cost-effective or the quickest solution, but rather people should be offering consumers the option between a time-sensitive approach or a financially effective approach. So if I'm a consumer who's a bit more financially savvy, then I realize I'm not going to want to get the item cheaper, so I'm going to pay for next day delivery, 2-3 quid. Whereas if I realize that I'm a time-sensitive person, which realistically I am, I don't have much patience, then I'm personally more than happy to pay for an on-demand delivery to get it straight away. Particularly if I'm buying something expensive or nice, or recently I bought an iPhone. I want to get my iPhone straight away, not in a couple of days' time. So I think looking at what the market needs to do, it's no longer about 15 minutes, it's no longer about next day, but rather as an e-commerce provider, I should be looking for a solution that provides all three of those so that as a consumer, I can make a decision that works best in what I need. If we look at the Q-commerce market, they've built up an incredible infrastructure of having dark warehouses across major cities. And it's time, I think, that people stop seeing it as purely as a grocery proposition, but rather as a proposition that people can store items to be collected locally, hyper-locally, and then delivered straight to the consumer. There's a company in London called Bodo, which are doing exactly that, which I think is the next wave of deliveries. They can arrange for things next day, same day, or on demand. And I think that's exactly what consumers need.
Quaid, if people want to get in contact with you to talk about this topic some more, how should they get in contact?
People can get in touch via LinkedIn, search me as Quaid Combstock, and I'm always happy to arrange a meeting or have a chat.
I'll stick a link to Quaid's LinkedIn profile on the episode page on the thepostalhub.com. Quaid Combstock, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you, Ed.
Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, Mindaugas Serpicus from Copenhagen Economics talking about postal sector research. I've really sold that one, haven't I? It's actually very, very interesting, so make sure you tune in for that one. Who else? Luke Lloyd from the IPC comes along to talk about cross-border delivery research. What's shopper research? But it's about delivery, so it's shoppers. Oh, never mind. Another great conversation that you won't want to miss. And Daniel Rueda from Open Price is going to come back in a little while to talk about more stuff relating to parcel pricings and bits and pieces like that. Make sure you don't miss any of these interviews, not just because it makes me happy, and I know my happiness, you're not responsible for my happiness, everybody. Not completely. Anyway, all I'm getting at is subscribe to the podcast. That's a very weird way of saying it. Subscribe to the podcast, please, in your favourite podcast platform. And remember to subscribe to the podcast newsletter. Go to thepostalhub.com. You'll find links to the newsletter there. You can sign up for the Daily Delivery Digest as well. I've got a top secret project coming along soon, which I'll tell you about in the next week or so stay tuned for that as well. What's all that about? I don't know. Only you, dear listener, the one person who listens to the end of these episodes, will find out. If you want to contact me, dear listener, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.